Sounds great.
Okay, so let me introduce our next guest. Okay, are you giving too much and getting too little? In this section, you're going to learn how to honor yourself and communicate the capacity that you can handle just what we were talking about. This will help you say goodbye to resenting your partners, friends, and family for taking advantage of you. And Kevin Strauss is going to talk about reciprocity. Kevin, wave your hand, Kevin. Kevin is an innovator, entrepreneur, author, and emotional health and wellness expert. Kevin wants life to be easier and happier for you and those you're closest to. He believes in supporting balanced wellness by providing insight and practical tools to nurture your physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. The healthier we are, the better and happier we feel, and happy people do good things. That is the truth. Kevin is the founder and CEO of Uchi. Did I say it right, Kevin?
Uchi?
Uchi, a private social app that facilitates communication and feeling heard, which strengthens relationships, nurtures mental health and emotional wellness, and improves behaviors. He's here today to share why reciprocity is important in relationships, why we struggle with it, and how you can improve so that you will be more closely connected to the people in your lives. Welcome, Kevin. I'm going to spotlight you for the group.
So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this works correctly. How's that looking?
Looks good.
Perfect.
Awesome, awesome. Okay. Okay, I was an very early adopter of online dating. Before the dating apps, before smartphones, even before digital cameras. So I met a woman on the Yahoo Personal a long time ago, and we traded a couple of emails, maybe once every week or two, we traded an email. But eventually we graduated to a phone conversation. And our very first phone conversation lasted 8 hours. You can't have a one-sided 8-hour phone conversation. It has to go both ways. There has to be reciprocity. And we could feel it. We could feel the energy. There was such an ease and a flow to our conversation. And that's the kind of feeling that you can have when you've got a real reciprocity in your relationship or with somebody that you met or you're engaging with. And actually the next day we had another phone conversation, and that lasted 3 hours, and it was more of the same. And then about a week later, we went on our first date. And remember, no digital cameras, no photos. So I didn't know what she looked like. I mean, we sort of described ourselves, but I didn't know what she actually looked like. And thankfully, she was gorgeous. I mean, I thought she was just the cutest thing ever. And we sat down at the restaurant. And again, we didn't even order food for an hour because we just fell into this give and take of sharing and listening and giving and receiving. And the energy, I mean, I think we were just creating this like massive electromagnetic field around the two of us that was just like amplifying. And that's the power of the give and receive of reciprocity. And you know it, you feel it. And the more you can create that and have that, then that's how the best relationships, I think, are going to happen for you. And, you know, feel free to share in the chat if you've had that experience, or, you know, maybe that's why you're here today, so that you can learn how to create that and maybe what's been getting in the way, because it is powerful. And long story short, we did completely fall in love. So it's just amazing, the relationship. But it was a two-way street, right? And that's really key in your relationships, right? You can't just have a one-way relationship. And I'm going to go back to a little bit of defining, because I think of things a little bit differently. And for me, emotional health is really this two-way street. It's this give and receive. And so I'm going to go through some definitions just so we're on the same page. And then think about that as I go through the rest of this presentation. So for me, emotional health is really about your ability to give and receive love, connection, and belonging. And I'll use those interchangeably. I'll just say love, but it's the connection and belonging. And that's a basic human need that we have. I know a lot of people might define emotional health as our ability to manage our emotions, but if you look up the definition of emotional intelligence, that is the definition of emotional intelligence. And I see emotional health as something very different. It's not about managing our emotions, and we're all going to have the full range of emotions, but it's our ability to give and receive love. We have basic human needs, and oftentimes we talk about the physical needs, and you see Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid, which actually he didn't come up with the pyramid. It was a marketing firm that came up with the pyramid. But what Maslow actually talked about was how we bounce between our needs at any given time. And I know we're all unique individuals and we all have our quirks and preferences, but as human beings, we all have the same basic needs. We all need air, right? You cut off someone's air supply for 2 or 3 minutes, they're dead. Like, that's it, game over, right? So we all need air. We all need water. You go 24 hours without water, you're going to be in a world of hurt. That's going to be really uncomfortable. The same thing with food. One person might be a vegetarian, someone might be lactose intolerant, but we all need food and we all need sleep, right? You go 24 hours without sleep, you're in a world of hurt there too. And then we need shelter and safety, security. So you can walk out of your cave and not be attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, or walk down the street and not be shot. And that is a problem in some areas in the US and definitely abroad, but these are our basic physical needs. But we also have a basic emotional need for love, connection, and belonging. And when any need is not met, it causes pain. And a human will do anything to ease their pain. And in the absence of having that emotional need met, we end up turning to behaviors, behaviors of all kinds: drugs, alcohol, work, athleticism, whatever, you name it, it's out there. So these basic needs need to be met. If your physical needs aren't met, you're dead, so nothing else really matters. But when that emotional need is not met, then you're going to do anything to get there, to appease it. And we think of this sometimes as mental health, but for me, mental health is really our thinking ability. It's our ability to focus, concentrate, think clearly, perform cognitive tasks. So that's why I think it's really important to separate. A lot of times mental and emotional health are used interchangeably, or emotional health is part of mental health. But to me, they're two different elements of your well-being. They interrelate, but they are separate. And just an example, my background in schooling is biomedical engineering. And, at my jobs through the years, working in medical device R&D, I can do the engineering drawings, I can write the test protocols and test reports and all that stuff. But the reason I quit my jobs is because I didn't feel heard and understood. I didn't feel valued by my boss or by my managers or senior management. And that's really why I quit. I could do the work, but when I didn't feel valued and loved, basically, at the job, then I disengaged and eventually quit. So that's why I think it's really important to separate the two. And when you have that need met, and with the definition that I came up with years ago for emotional health, that reciprocity is built in. We have to give and receive. And that's the only way it's going to really be supported. And when we're building those relationships or the connections, I think there's two key elements. And again, reciprocity is built into this. I think that in order for connections to really happen, one, both people need to be sharing comparable kinds of information or experiences, and they both need to be sharing to a similar depth or intimacy. We see it all the time when in a parent-child relationship, the child comes home from school and the parent basically interrogates the child, right? You come home from school and it's like, how was school? What was your homework? What did you do? What test do you have to study for? But when does the parent ever share with the child what their day was like? When does the parent, my dad never came home from work and said, I was given this presentation today, it didn't go so well. I'm really upset about it. My boss isn't happy. I don't know what's going to go. My dad never said anything about that. And when your parents aren't sharing and teaching you how to share, and they're not being a part of that relationship in the connection, then right from the beginning, at our earliest ages, we start to struggle. And this is what we're learning. It's this unbalanced relationship. So those are some of the definitions, and I just wanted you to keep those in mind as we go forward, because I think reciprocity is just built right in to these basic definitions. But there's a lot more that is important in relationships, and we talked about it, and Tay and Lee were already talking about a lot of these elements, trust and empathy and respect and vulnerability. Vulnerability has been coming up a lot today. I love that. But we also need to be able to put the time in, right? If we don't put time into our relationships, if both people, I think this was in the last poll, right? If we're not both putting in the kind of time, it's going to be unbalanced. So one person is giving and the other person is receiving, but that first person, what are they receiving? And you're going to struggle there. I love that we were talking about the long distance relationships and things. And, I've said for a long time, I think it's pretty obvious, relationships aren't built in a day. They're not built in a 1 hour call a week. It's not like you say, you're starting a romantic relationship, let's say, and you're like, okay, we're going to talk every Tuesday from 7 to 8 p.m. and that's going to be our relationship. How does that really work? That would have never worked for Tina and me because our first conversation was 8 hours long. But I can say that if you are willing to put in that time on a consistent basis, if both people are willing to do it, if both people are willing to put in the energy and the trust and the vulnerability and a lot of other words that aren't even listed here, it can happen. I met a person on LinkedIn about 1.5 years ago. His name's Joe. And we connected through a post on LinkedIn. And I bet some other people have had this experience. So if you want to share in the chat, feel free. And we graduated from comments on LinkedIn to a phone call, and it was a really good phone call. And, we both followed through with that, right? We were talking about that earlier. And we decided, hey, let's have a call, next Friday also. So the next Friday we got on the phone, talked for 1 or 2 hours, and it was great. And then we did it every single week for like a year. And we have built an incredibly strong foundation for a friendship. He's actually was the editor of my book and the designer of the cover of my book. And we've built this incredible friendship. We don't talk every Friday anymore, but we still stay in touch now. We text and we talk, every 2 weeks maybe. But we've built that foundation by both putting in the effort for an entire year to have a foundation for a friendship, for a relationship. Something else I'd like to highlight about, putting in this effort and understanding that you don't have to be in person to have a relationship or a friendship. It doesn't have to be live. It doesn't have to be a phone call. And some people have shared that today already, which is really exciting to hear. But this is something that we were really like seeing through COVID, like, oh, we have to be in person. We have to get kids back in school. But that's actually not true. Online universities have been around for years before COVID hit, and kids do fine. Granted, they're not 7, 8-year-olds, but people do fine with virtual learning. We're having a virtual meeting right now. But what I want to get to, the point I want to make is that we know from 2,500 years of data that two people can have a profoundly deep connection just from writing letters. It doesn't have to be a love letter, but that is often where we are so vulnerable in the written word. And it's not in real time, it's asynchronous and it's powerful. When before the internet, when soldiers were off at war and they'd write home and exchange letters with their loved ones back home, they could maintain really strong relationships because both parties were willing to put in the effort and the time and the energy and be vulnerable and sharing. And it's just amazing what can happen when you do put that time and energy in and when it is reciprocal. Because if it's one-sided, it's just going to fade away. But unfortunately, a lot of us are struggling with reciprocity, right? We talked about how one of us, gives a card out at a business meeting and then there's no follow through, So why do we struggle with this so much? And I would argue, or not even argue, I think plainly, you're not broken. You're not a bad person if you struggle with the reciprocity. I think one of the most important things is, how can we give what we never learned? Just like when I was talking about, my parents not sharing with me, I think a lot of people grow up that way. If we haven't learned how to share, if we haven't learned how to give and what it feels like to receive that, then how are we going to give it back? I remember a time when I was kind of young and I was about 9 years old and I had this favorite winter hat. I don't know why I loved it so much, but I did. It was one of those like cones with a pom-pom, like red and blue pom-pom, and a blue cone and a red band with this little elephant cartoon. I don't even know what it was. And I lost my hat and I was so upset. I was like crying upset. And my mom was like, "Why are you crying about this hat? It's no big deal. We'll buy you another hat." She was not honoring my feelings. She was dismissing my feelings. She even went so far as to say, "You know what? If you want to cry, go upstairs in your room and cry, because I don't want to hear it." So that's what I did. I went up in my room and I cried all by myself. My mom wasn't even there for me to acknowledge my feelings, to validate my feelings. So I didn't ever learn how to acknowledge someone else's feelings, how to validate their feelings. And what that might look like, because acknowledgement and validation is like an entire other workshop that if you're interested, get in touch with me afterwards. But an acknowledging statement might be something like, "I can see you're really upset about losing your hat." That lets me know that my mom sees my emotion and understands me, and I matter enough for her to see that and share that with me. And that means so much. And a validating statement might be something like, losing something really important is upsetting. Now I know that she gets me and I feel heard and understood and I feel valued. And value basically equals love. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges as a species right now. Another example that comes up is, how many people do we know end up just being fixers, right? You tell them a problem and they just want to fix it. And this is what I was raised with, here's a problem, let me go fix it. But if we haven't learned how to be with that person, just sit with them and be with them in support, but we have to go fix it, right? But when you can just be with someone and be silent with them, and maybe just a hand on the shoulder or a little hug, that lets them know that you're there with them and you support them. Those are the kind of things that we can do. We don't always have to fix everything right when it happens. So another thing that happens, and this usually is early on, and we talked about it earlier. I love that so many things were already discussed in the interview with Tay, are our needs being met in the relationship? And I think this is one of the most important elements of loving yourself first. Are you able to set your boundaries? Are you able to set expectations? We've already talked about this. It's so cool. Because I thought maybe I'm the only one that even thinks this, but I am clearly not, which is awesome. But I remember a time when I had a friend who was just constantly complaining about her job, right? How many people, have these friends in their lives, right? And she was constantly complaining, and I want to be supportive and I want to listen. So I'd listen, but this was going on for weeks, for months, every time we talked. And she was just draining all the energy out. She was like an energy vampire, right? Just sucking the energy out of me. And finally, I had to set a boundary. And I was like, Stacy, I'm your friend, I'm here for you, but I just can't listen to you complain about your job anymore. If you want help fixing your job, or getting a new job, I will do anything possible to help you with that. But I just can't talk about your job or listen to you complain about it anymore. And she was like stunned, like she was like shocked that I said this, but I had to for me, you know? Well, about 2 weeks later, she called me up and she's like, you know, Kevin, I just want to thank you so much for giving me that kick in the butt that I needed, because after you said you couldn't listen to me anymore, complain, I updated my resume and I started sending it out, and I've got a job interview. It looks really good and I'm probably going to get it, you know? And so me setting that boundary for myself ended up helping my friend, and our friendship just, you know, continued to blossom, which is just wonderful. We also talked about mismatched expectations. And I have another friend who has two friends. So it's like they have this little trio, and they've been best friends for 20 years. So he thought, hey, these are people that I can call in the middle of the night. They're always going to be there for me. You know, it's like, it's a given, right? Well, you know, he ran on some tough times a few years ago, and they weren't there for him. And even when he called and reached out, they wouldn't give him the time. You know, they might say hello, but they're like, oh, I got to run. You know, they wouldn't meet up with him in person. They wouldn't have the phone conversation. And he tried to, you know, find out what's going on or what's happening here, and they wouldn't engage. And, you know, he thought that they had really solid friendships, but unfortunately, they weren't in the same place, even after 20 years. And that trio of friends completely blew up and faded away just because their expectations were really off. So I think that's another really important thing that we can do. You know, I know a lot of my friends in the dating world talk about setting expectations for romance, but you know, how many of us set expectations early on with our friendships? You know, it's something that I might think about doing. You know, what do you think? And I think one of the last things that we really struggle with, and I sort of touched on it earlier, is, are we good listeners ourselves? I think being a good listener is one of the most important aspects of a relationship, any relationship. And, you know, we always hear all these, you know, workshops and pamphlets and posts about listening, and we need better listening skills and all. But if we've never been listened to, then how have we learned? Have we not learned how to listen? And if we haven't learned how to be good listeners, then how can we be good listeners to others? We're going to have to make a real effort to be a good listener to someone else if it's not something that we learned. And I shared earlier, you know, my mom is a great example because she is a terrible listener. I mean, you know, a little while back, I bought this shirt at Walmart, and I was so excited about this shirt. I got a great deal on it. It fit me great. It's exactly what I needed. And I was sharing this with my mom. I was like, Mom, I bought this shirt. It's really great. And the next words out of her mouth were, oh, I got a shirt at Walmart also, and it was so good, and I got the sale on it, and then the cashier did something wrong when she rang it up, and I got an extra $10 off, and it was so, my mom went on for 15 minutes about, actually it wasn't a shirt, but about the product that she bought. She never even said something like, oh, I'm glad you found a shirt that you liked. She just launched into her story. She didn't hear anything that I said, which means I didn't feel understood. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel valued, which means I didn't feel loved by my mom. So now that's one of the reasons why I asked that question to Tay about, you know, how are you able to really step into yourself and own your own self? I still struggle with this today, but I'm getting better at understanding that this is just something my mom is not even capable of. So I need to stop looking for this from my mom. Doesn't mean I need to end the relationship with her, because there's a lot of other wonderful things about our relationship. But I just know that if I want to be heard and understood, my mom is not the person to go to for that, for me anyway. So we've talked about the giving and receiving, and that's what reciprocity is all about. But how often are we giving what we want to receive? Right? Are we modeling that? And I think this is really important. It kind of comes back to the golden rule, you know, do unto others as you want them to do to you. But I think this is often really thought about in the physical sense, like we're taught as children, don't hit somebody if you don't want them to hit you, or don't steal their toy if you want them to steal your toy. But I think it's really important that we behave in ways that we want to receive back. And are we doing that? Have we learned that? This reminds me of another story. When I was at the grocery store, and there was a mom and her little boy, about 6 feet away. This is actually during COVID. So they were about 6, 7 feet away. And the little boy is about 7 years old. He was kind of small, but he was trying to put a case of water bottles into the cart. And he's small. And, a case of water bottles is like, I don't know, 15 pounds or something. It's pretty heavy. And he was really struggling. And his mom says to him, right in front of me, his mom says to him, boy, you better get some muscles on you if you can't put that water in the cart. You better toughen up some. And he was like stunned by what his mom said. And then he looked at me and we made eye contact, and he was so embarrassed. His mom was shaming him in front of me, in front of another man. What must be going on for that? He's not thinking probably, but he's feeling. What is he feeling? That's trauma. It's not trauma like being, sexually assaulted or growing up with an alcoholic parent. Yes, those are horrific traumas. We never want those to happen. But when your mom is shaming you and shaming you in front of somebody else, that leaves an impression. That guides, that dictates who you're going to be later on. And I think too often we're raising our kids this way. We're teaching our kids that in order to interact, we need to shame or judge or degrade or emotionally neglect, like when I was crying and my mom just ignored my feelings. And this is how we're raising our kids, right? You can even take it into the school system. You're in kindergarten, you go to kindergarten, and it's like, oh, Lee, he's such a good boy. He put all his things in his cubby. Yay, Lee, he can go to recess on time. Oh, Kevin, he's a bad boy. He didn't put his things in his cubby. He can't go to recess for 10 more minutes. We are judging our kids straight away. Maybe it was a mistake and that's a learning opportunity. But when we judge and shame and degrade each other, it destroys the connection. It destroys our emotional health. That's what we learn. And then that's what we end up giving to others. One last little example that comes to mind is a friend of mine. And this was only a few months ago, actually. A very good friend of mine was sharing some information that she had learned recently, and she was really passionate about it. And so she was going on, we're on a phone call. She's going on and on for like 35 minutes. And I'm there, I'm present. It's not like I put the phone down and walked away or something. I was there, I was, yep, okay. And I tried to ask questions, but I just didn't really know anything about this topic. And I tried to acknowledge and validate where I could, but she was just going on and on, kind of like I'm doing right now, right? And at the end of this 35 minutes, I didn't really agree with what she was saying. And she took that as she's wrong and I'm right. And we got into this big argument. And she's like, you're not even listening to me. You're not hearing me. I'm like, no, I've been in this conversation for 35 minutes, but you've just been preaching at me for 35 minutes that I am just completely emotionally exhausted, mentally too, but emotionally exhausted. And I feel like garbage because I wasn't even part of this conversation. It was destroying my emotional health. But what this also taught me is by feeling how horrible it was to be talked at for so long, I realized, oh my God, I do this to people all the time. And it was finally getting this dose of what I'm giving to others. Now they're giving it back to me. And that's not what I want. I want others to be happy and engaged and reciprocal. But in that preacher moment, it wasn't reciprocal, and it was just destroying our relationship. We had a huge argument, and it's actually taken a lot of effort and discussion to get back to where we were before. So that's what happens when the reciprocity is not there and when we're not giving out what we also want to receive. So I've identified a lot of challenges and problems and things, but I also want to offer more solutions. And some of these solutions actually fit into what I call the Uchi Connection movement. And I'll explain Uchi in a minute, the app, but the Uchi Connection movement, well, Uchi in Japanese means in-group or inner circle. So this movement is about how you're interacting with the people closest to you. And it's really just a promise to yourself. And the promise is that whenever you're interacting with somebody, you're going to do everything you can to acknowledge and validate them, and especially their feelings and emotions. And that's going to do incredible things for your connection. The second part of the Uchi Connection movement is to really listen, to hear and understand the other person. Not listen just so that you can talk again or so you can regurgitate back what they said, to really understand, where are they coming from? Why does this matter to them? Why is it important to them? Because when they feel heard and understood, they're going to know that they matter to you and that they're valuable and that they're loved. And again, that just helps the relationship grow stronger just every time it happens. And the last part of the Uchi Connection movement is a promise to yourself that you're going to stop shaming, judging, degrading, or neglecting anyone whenever you're interacting with them, because that is the fastest way to destroy a relationship. So those are things that you can do just when you're interacting. And when you start giving it out that way, it's going to start coming back to you as well. You'll be role modeling what you want to come back to you, and it's powerful. What you can also do is use the Uchi app. So Uchi is a social app that I created, and I'll be honest with you, I actually created it. It took me about 15 years to figure this out, but I actually created this app so that my parents would listen to me, because they don't, and I needed to feel heard. But it's amazing. It's an amazing tool to share your perspective and be heard, but just by the people who matter to you, your Uchi, right? And the way it works is there's just this whole database of questions, and you answer questions in any order, and they're not therapy questions, and they're not like deep, dark secret questions. They're just, how do you see the world and what matters to you? And you share your answers on the platform, but only your Uchi friends can read your answers. It's not public like any other social media, because it's not a social media. It's not public, so nobody else can read your answers. But what we did is we built reciprocity directly into it, because while only your friends can read your answers, they can only read your answer if they've already answered that question. So with Uchi, you have to give in order to receive. It's built into the app. And then there's one more element of Uchi, which is the Uchi Tribe, which that's a fee-based feature. Uchi's free, Uchi Connection movement, that's all free, of course. But the Uchi Tribe is if you want to come up with your own questions and invite a group of people, maybe up to 10 people in a private session, and those people don't have access to any of your regular Uchi activity. It's just private. It's like those people are on an island discussing the questions that Uchi leader came up with. So those are a couple of tools that you can implement today. And just a couple other things to reiterate, listening as much as we're sharing, setting those expectations and boundaries so that we're balanced in our relationships, and recognizing how you feel in the relationship. Do you feel energized whenever you're done with it? Whenever you're done with that interaction, or do you feel drained? And it seems like, I think of emotional health and connection as like a spiral, and a negative interaction is like a full spiral down, and a positive interaction is like a quarter of a spiral up. And I know a lot of us are probably, barely treading water, barely breaking even. So we just need more of that positive interaction. Again, acknowledging, validating, listening, give and receive. And that's what's going to make our relationships the best that they can be. So I think with that, I'll just share the special offer. Is that cool, Lee? Or Tamara?
Yep.
Okay. So what I'd like to offer is, I'd like to offer 8 people to join Lee and me in a private Uchi tribe over the next several days where we're going to ask questions to dig in deeper about the Love Yourself First conference and about reciprocity and relationships and friendships. And we're going to have deeper conversation using the app. It's all free, of course. And I think just send your name and email to Lee directly. Is that what we're going to do?
Yes, that's what we're going to do.
Okay, so in the chat, just send a direct message to Lee with your name and email. He'll put it in a hat, and the 8 people he picks out will get you set up, and you can experience an Uchi tribe with us and have some deeper conversation. So with that, peace, love, and connect.